Blessings, beloveds. Welcome back to my channel, Anastasia, Cosmic Astrologer, with you today. All right, guys, so this is going to be an update for the month of April, which we are heading towards in the next couple of days. I've been wanting to do this video for a few days, but as we all know, this Mercury retrograde period, well, I might just start talking about that a bit. So today's the 30th of March, and Mercury has now decided to move direct, thank God. This Mercury retrograde period, I personally have found it to have been a lot more challenging than other Mercury periods, Mercury retrograde periods, and I think that has a lot to do with the fact that Mercury has been retrograde in Pisces, conjunct Neptune, and square Jupiter. The retrograde period, we have this 3 times a year with Mercury, and it goes retrograde, for about 3 weeks or so. So that's not an unusual experience, but I guess the thing to always keep in mind is that, it's not an accident that planets go retrograde. It's not it's a phenomenon in the heavens, as it were, with the apparent movement of the planets, because they're not actually literally moving backwards. They just appear to be, from our perspective here on Earth. But it's more the symbolism and the psychological implications around what it means when a planet turns back and to go backwards, to go retrograde. And it is always a period of, as we know, of reflection and turning within. Any planet that goes retrograde is an opportunity for us to turn that energy within and to connect with it on an inner level, on an inner dimension, connecting to our subconscious and our unconscious components as well. There's so much going on, in our left brain on a day-to-day basis with our consciousness and our expression out there and our solar expression. But every time a planet turns retrograde, it is really a powerful opportunity to enter these other dimensions within yourself and examine what is there, because there is always so much going on within us that's developing, that's assimilating, that's integrating, and a lot of that stuff is not necessarily accessible on a day-to-day basis. So when these planets go retrograde, this is the whole purpose. It's really about stepping within and going into those deeper spaces so that you can actually connect to, in the case of Mercury, information, ideas, thoughts, knowledge, learning, all those sorts of things that's been going on an external level. So when Mercury goes retrograde, we have that opportunity to now enter that stream from a much deeper space within us. But on an external outer surface level, when Mercury is retrograde and we are trying to push forward with the stream of communication on all the levels that communication exists, which is writing, sending letters, emails, text messages, calling people, speaking to people, etc., something gets messed up, and Mercury in Pisces is in its detriment anyway. So Mercury in Pisces is not a strong position for Mercury. It can be wonderful when we're talking about inner reflective mental processes that connect to higher truths within ourselves, because everyone has a different perspective of what truth is. And I love that quote by Krishnamurti, who says truth is a pathless land. That quote just says it all. So that helps us understand, I think, that we all have our own personal individual version of truth and how we experience that. But the sign of Pisces, the archetype of Pisces, is the ultimate truth. It's the last sign in the zodiac. You know, when you look at the zodiac and you start at Aries and you go right around, the end point, the completion point is Pisces, which represents the completion of an entire cycle. It represents endings. It represents the divine. It represents higher truths that we can connect with. But from an ego left brain level, our consciousness can't really grasp those higher truths, which is why we need to have these retrograde periods and be able to go in and access deeper understanding and higher truths, what's relevant to us at any stage in our life. Because every year when these planets are going retrograde, every year is a different year for you in your life, as it is for me, as it is for everybody else. So there's layers upon layers in terms of cycles that are going on that are unfolding various processes in our life on our evolutionary path. So this retrograde Mercury in Pisces conjunct Neptune has been really, 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 really tricky to handle. Just on a very superficial level, for instance, for myself, I dropped my phone in the supermarket, the whole screen detached, so I had to get a new phone, which actually wasn't a bad thing because I really needed a new phone anyway, but it was just interesting that it happened during Mercury retrograde. I've had a lot of miscommunication with clients, even with birth dates, with just a number of different streams. The communication has been very, very difficult on that external surface level to be direct and clear, because it's not direct and clear when it's in Pisces. The best thing that we can do when Mercury is retrograde in Pisces is really explore the inner dimensions, with meditation, yoga nidra practices, deep reflection, journal writing, anything that takes you into those inner dimensions. Yoga, all those sorts of practices are very, very powerful. Wanting to connect with your spirit guides, with your higher self, with your right brain, all those expressions and experiences of life are very rich during this time, but not everyone is interested in that and not everyone has a connection to that. So, this is where it depends what's going on in your life and who you are and what you're trying to do during this time when Mercury is retrograde. So needless to say, it's been an incredibly difficult retrograde period because of that Neptune conjunction. Now, again, on a spiritual perspective, Mercury conjunct Neptune is wonderful for psychic expansion, for third eye expansion, for clairvoyant development, for anything to do with opening yourself up and being receptive to the other dimensions of our existence, to altered states of consciousness. But on the surface, mundane level, Mercury conjunct Neptune can be experienced so easily between people in a way of total miscommunication, unable to understand what the other person's saying to you. It can actually be deliberate or non-deliberate deception. Mercury Neptune can be a really good liar, someone who can really trick and deceive people. So, that every planet has different layers of expression, whether we are talking about lower manifestations and higher manifestations. So, it's always important to look at it from the perspective of who you are and where you stand, in your current path of evolution. So for the last 3 weeks, while Mercury has been retrograde in Pisces, formed a square to Jupiter. The square to Jupiter added a lot of exaggerated beliefs, you could say, right? A lot of information being put out there that's just been totally exaggerated and just completely blown out of the water. And I've seen that, basically take effect in terms of certain shows that have been presented on through the media and so forth about very high-profile people, including artists and so forth. I'm not going to talk about who it was and what they've said because I don't want to start a debate over a particular individual that's been highly public, who's no longer with us, by the way, in the last few weeks. While this Mercury has been retrograde, squaring Neptune, conjunct Neptune square Jupiter, it's been very interesting to watch the fabricated, deceptive information that's been put out there and how it's so easily accepted by people as though it's truth when it's not, in my opinion. I'm talking about Michael Jackson. There it is. I'll say it. Okay. So we've now, the last couple of days, by the way, Mercury was stationary retrograde. So the stationary period of any planet that's either going retrograde or direct is a very, very, very sensitive zone. Those couple of days, so yesterday and the day before, while Mercury was stationary direct, that the energy there, it's intensified because it's at a point where it's building, getting ready to turn the other way. So it's a real hot zone. It's a very volatile, sensitive sort of area, if you like, those couple of days. So if you were trying to push forward with things or get clear on things, it was probably very, very difficult, I suspect. And now Mercury has gone direct today. It doesn't mean that suddenly everything is crystal clear for you today in terms of what Mercury has been influencing for you the last 3.5 weeks. So, where has transiting Mercury been in your own birth chart? Because it is that area of your life that the whole Mercury retrograde period has impacted you. In addition to that, what you can also pay attention to as a secondary part of info is that, well, which houses does Mercury rule in your birth chart? Because those houses will get somehow drawn into the story of what's been happening the last 3 weeks from a Mercury perspective, which is all to do with your communication world. So Mercury going direct today just means that we've just literally just stepped into the vibration of this planet now changing direction, and still in Pisces though, so we've still got that energy of Pisces very, very strong for the month of April, because we have Venus has ingressed into Pisces, Neptune is in Pisces, Mercury is in Pisces, and we are going to have the moon in Pisces in a couple of days' time as well. The moon's just gone into Aquarius today, which is another reason I chose to sit down and do this video today, because Mercury's gone direct and the moon's in Aquarius, and I love the moon in Aquarius. It's actually my own natal moon. The moon in Capricorn is very, very heavy, and has been for a long time. I mean, moon in Capricorn's pretty heavy on its own. It's a Saturn ruled sign, but because we've had Pluto in Capricorn for such a long time, and Saturn in Capricorn, for 2.5 years, we've still got, I think, at least another year of that. So every time every month, the moon goes into Capricorn, it catches up and it sits right next to Saturn and Pluto. So there's a period every single month where the moon's in Capricorn and it's conjunct Saturn and Pluto, that there's a very intense level of emotional stuff that we may need to purge, but there's a lot of resistance to it because of Saturn there. So the desire with Pluto is to purge that out, to transform that, to clear that up inside your own self. and the Saturn can cause that friction, that resistance, So it's a very intense, awkward, difficult kind of energy that we have for a couple of days there every month when the moon's in Capricorn, which is another reason I didn't do this session yesterday or the day before. I specifically waited for the moon to go into Aquarius. Felt a lot better for me personally, which is today, and Mercury's gone direct. Therefore, I feel that what I'm sharing with you guys today will be clear and direct as well. So that's what's been going on with Mercury. Now, I want to just talk a little bit more about the Mercury in Pisces, the Neptune in Pisces, and the Venus in Pisces, because they're all going to catch up together. What's the date of that? So, first of all, Venus ingressed into Pisces on the 27th of March. So Venus in Pisces is an exalted position. Venus, first of all, is a benefic planet, right? So when Venus transits a chart, she's not a planet that brings harm in any kind of way because she's a benefic planet. But when she's in signs that challenge her, such as Scorpio or Aries, for instance, then what you're going to see is you're going to see the more darker sort of shades of Venus, if you like. But Venus in Pisces, she's exalted, which is a term that we use to describe the dignity of a planet, because every single planet has a certain amount of dignity or debility depending on which zodiac sign it's in. In some signs, it takes a neutral position. It's neither dignified nor debilitated. But when planets are exalted or in rulership or in detriment or in fall or in exaltation, it's very important to pay attention to that component, because that tells you a lot about what this planetary energy is offering during its time in this particular zodiacal sign. So Venus in Pisces, she's exalted, so she's very, very happy. Now, Venus in Pisces is really about the very deep yearning for divine love, looking for that experience or wanting to give that unconditional love to perhaps your partner or to very close people in your life, because Venus also connects to friends and stuff as well. Venus connects to our social life too. So it's the people that are very, very close to you. In other words, when Venus is in Pisces, it's a really, really beautiful energy just to enjoy very close contact with people, where there's this incredible sense of giving, empathy and compassion, unconditional love. And ultimately for ourselves, it's really about wanting that divine union and love, with the closest person to us. So Venus in Pisces is also going to be the sign that brings gifts, So while Venus is in Pisces, which is basically until the 21st of April, so 3 weeks, whatever it is, that's a very beautiful time and a very exalted sort of period for Venus to be showering gifts upon you, as it were. So don't be surprised, and especially if you have a good Venus in your chart. When I say a good Venus, good is probably not the appropriate word to use, actually, because it's very limiting and it presumes a judgment. So I'll withdraw that. If your Venus natally has good aspects in your chart, if she's supported by other planets, if she's in a sign that she really shines through, then transiting Venus is going to be quite powerful for you. If Venus is not so well placed in your chart, then you might not experience the full spectrum of the gifts and the benefics that she offers, but you still will experience some of those in different ways. So, and those of you that have Venus in Pisces natally are obviously having a Venus return. And I just wanted to mention, for those of you that are not aware, in the same way that you can do a solar return chart, you can also do a Venus return chart. And it's a very, very interesting area of astrology to play around with. And what I suggest you do so that you can really understand how Venus transits work for you, and you can do this for any planet, by the way, is just draw up what's called a Venus return chart. So if you haven't done this before, I recommend you try it out and just play around with it, and go back to the last 5 years or the last 2 years or the last 10 years if you like, however long you like, it's up to you. But if you go back and look at the Venus return charts in the last few years, you can see what Venus has been highlighting, because the Venus return chart is the chart of what Venus is going to look like for the next 12 months ahead for you. What are the themes that show up in the Venus return chart? And the things to look out for is Venus on an angle, and what aspects does she have? Normally when Venus is on an angle, and in addition to that she has some pretty important aspects, then that Venus return chart becomes quite prominent for the next 12 months for you. So that's just another level that you can add to looking at transiting Venus, through your birth chart. It's an actual chart unto itself. So those of you who are having a Venus return at the moment, because you have Venus in Pisces, which is me as well, Venus return will always highlight matters of money and relationships, because and social activity as well. And you can expand on that and say, well, it's connected to my values, and how I love, and how I give love, and how I receive love. So there's all those sorts of archetypal expressions from Venus. But very briefly and very sort of specifically, the things that I've noticed that Venus really, really highlights when you have a Venus return is what's going on in the world of money for you, and what's going on in the world of relationships for you. And you may or may not be in a relationship, but it'll still be highlighted a highlighted thing for your consciousness, because Venus is drawing your attention to it during this time. I remember my last Venus return, which was last year, I had just out of the blue people just giving me gifts, and pretty generous gifts, I might add. They weren't, not that it matters, a gift is a gift, but I'm just simply saying that, they were pretty amazing gifts. So that's just to demonstrate, like I've got Venus in Pisces in my chart. She's exalted, so she's very, very strong in my chart. So if that's you, if you have Venus in Pisces, your Venus is exalted. There's a lot of benefit that you can get through Venus. If you don't have Venus in Pisces, that's okay. Then Venus is transiting that part of your chart where you have Pisces in your chart. So that area of your life is quite exalted during this time while Venus is in that part of your chart. Also look at the houses that Venus rules in your chart. Same principle that we applied with Mercury when we're looking at Mercury retrograde and we're wanting to understand what the hell's going on with that Mercury retrograde for us. We look at the house that it's in, and we look at the house that it rules in our birth chart, right? Because then you can flesh out a bigger sort of understanding and story around what that means for you. So Venus in Pisces, Mercury in Pisces, Neptune in Pisces, Sun in Aries, and eventually Mercury is going to move into Aries. But before it does, we're going to have this Venus, Neptune, Mercury conjunction. It's a very interesting energy because on the one hand, we've entered, as it's very popular now to say, the Aries season, for instance. But whilst we have this Aries energy that started, on the 21st of March during the equinox, which is the most beautiful representation of new energy being born. You know, it's when the sun is at 0 degrees of Aries. It's a very, very powerful time in the year, hence the equinox. Now, actually, just to backtrack, because I wanted to mention this in the beginning, and I think I did forget because I got, see, Mercury in Pisces just took me around in this whirl of Pisces energy. I wanted to start by saying that on the 21st of March, when the sun went into Aries during the equinox, you know, a few hours later, we had a full moon in Libra. That was a very interesting way to start the Aries season, the Aries vibration with the sun in Aries, because a full moon in Aries, a full moon in Libra, I'm sorry, is clearly the complete opposite to the sun in Aries. So the sun was conjunct Chiron, by the way, in that full moon chart, and the full moon was in Libra. So that within itself really speaks to relationships, clearly, and ourselves. So the actual identification we have with who we think we are, Aries, and the Chiron there speaking to, I guess, an aspect perhaps of our core identity that may be carrying some kind of wound, which no doubt it is, because if you're human, which you are, we all are, although we are first and foremost, we are spiritual, infinite, conscious beings, but we come down, we incarnate into this physical body. So we take on the persona, the identity, the physicality, and we start to experience life through this vehicle, right? So what I'm trying to say is that there's not one human being that hasn't got some flaw or wound in some kind of way. If they didn't, they wouldn't be human, right? So there is something within all of us that might be fractured or wounded, or and as a result needs healing. And that's what this Chiron in Aries journey is taking us through over the next 7 years. But getting back to that full moon on the 21st of March, Sun conjunct Chiron, full moon in Libra, that's pretty basic astrology. We're talking about self and other, Aries, Libra, and full moon, highlighting, basically stepping into the season of Aries, which is all about the self, and also Aries and Libra are both cardinal signs, right? So they are signs that represent initiation. Aries takes the initiation for oneself, and Libra takes the initiation in relationships. So point being, though, that Aries and Libra that sit right opposite each other, those two archetypes, that axis is all about the world of relationships and our sense of our own self. So that full moon in Libra with the Sun conjunct Chiron really speaks to the world of relationships from a collective perspective, and our own personal relationships in our own personal life. So, just to expand on that a little bit, this Chiron in Aries is so powerful. The last time we had Chiron in Aries was about 50 years ago, 51 years ago, thereabouts. The world was very different 50 years ago. A lot of you weren't even born then. Neither was I. But the Chiron in Aries at this time in history is really, really speaking to each of us to have that courage and be really honest, with ourselves, and address what is it within me or you and everybody else. What is it within us that really needs healing in terms of our core identity and who we think we are? Because any fracture in terms of dysfunction out there, violence, aggression, that dysfunctional sort of behavior, The reason it's out there is because it's projected from inside here, from each of us. So as long as we continue to project our what we suppress, what we're deeply hurt about or deeply angry about, and we don't resolve it and confront it and understand it and heal it, we're just going to continuously project it out there. And unfortunately, when it's projected out there, it's quite dark, and it creates this violence and aggression and split. You know, there's no unison in a sense. When you're looking at the world out there, there doesn't appear to be much unison at all. But in truth, we are all united, at least on a soul and spiritual level. But, you know, for everybody to work on that level, it requires consciousness, awareness, intention. So this full moon, to me, really speaks to the wounded relationships in the world, because there's a lot of them, and the wounded relationships in our life, and perhaps a wounded relationship that we even have with ourselves, right? So I'm using the word wounded because that is the most typical word used to describe Chiron's energy, but we must always remember that next to the word wound is the word healing, right? Because Chiron was this incredible, wise healer, teacher, and so forth. So, but it has been my experience through observation in my own life and in the many, many readings and charts that I've done and counseling sessions, whatever, that the Chiron in the birth chart, no one is born feeling perfect and feeling like they don't have to work through anything or develop anything. I don't think there is a human like that. If there is, drop me a line. I would love to hear from you. So what I'm trying to say is that Chiron always brings up what needs to be healed within us. You know, there's a reason for that. It's not a random thing. Again, you know, the time you were born, wherever Chiron was, there's a very big story around that. There's a very big reason why you were born with Chiron in a particular sign, in a particular house. It's not by chance. For some people, Chiron is a stronger energy, I agree. And for some people, it doesn't seem to appear to resonate as strongly. But that can change because people's lives change as well. But yeah, so this full moon on the 21st of March, to me, really speaks to the fractured relationships in the world, period. So that's how we sort of started the Aries season, if you like, and then we went into that retrograde Mercury period, which, as I've already discussed, has been quite challenging. Fortunately, Venus has gone into Pisces. Mind you, when she was in Aquarius, that was fine. It was great. Nothing wrong at all with Venus in Aquarius. She's beautiful there too. Nothing wrong with Venus in any sign. Let me just be clear. There's just obviously different archetypal expressions and different levels of dignity and debility wherever she is, in the same way there is for any other planet. So for the next 3 weeks, we've got that Venus in Pisces, Mercury in Pisces still, Neptune in Pisces. That's what I wanted to say. So on the one hand, there's a vibration at the moment collectively because of this Sun in Aries and Chiron in Aries, and Mercury will eventually go into Aries as well. There's this vibration of the spirit of Aries, which is what? It's courage, right? It's taking the initiative. It's finding that strength and courage and leadership ability within your own self, perhaps to, you know, step into whatever it is you need to initiate in your own life. So the Aries energy is always about initiation, you know. I mean, at best, it's about initiation, freedom, raw energy being expressed. You know, Aries has very, very, very strong instincts, right? So the Aries energy can really connect us much more to our instincts, you know, to get really in touch with that level within us that helps us understand things from levels that we normally wouldn't on a day-to-day left brain level. You know, instincts are very raw, they're very deep. Instincts don't have dialogue around them. They don't have language. They don't have words. The instincts are just something that you feel, you know something, or you feel certain about something, and there's no thought about it. When the instinct comes up, the thought comes later, right? So it's that raw instinctual sort of energy and drive. So there's a lot of that vibration present at the moment because of the Aries energy. But on the other hand, with all this Pisces energy, we are also being asked actually to surrender to certain things. You know, Pisces is about surrender ultimately. It's surrendering the ego. So Neptune in Pisces, Mercury in Pisces, Venus in Pisces, there is a very strong vibration in the month of April that requires us to let go and surrender to certain things in our life, and more specifically to do with Venus, Mercury, and Neptune, right? So we have this very totally different energy. You know, we, on the one hand, the Aries is wanting to initiate and take charge, and we do need to do that. Wherever the sun is transiting in your chart, it's shining that light, that solar force, that solar energy, that Aries vibration of confidence and courage to take steps towards whatever it is you need to take step towards to, depending on where it's transiting in your chart. But on the other hand, the Venus, Mercury, and Neptune in Pisces speaks to that area of our life where we actually need to let go and surrender, and also allow some things to complete and finish, because Pisces is a sign of completion and endings. And that is the kind of bitter, sort of sweet, or ecstasy and agony version of the energy of Pisces. It has this energy of ecstasy and agony, and the agony is very much linked to things coming to an end. You know, when something ends in life, regardless of whether it was good or bad, just to use very basic, simple language, there is still a process of grief connected to that ending. It's a very natural human expression. We must grieve what finishes, right? But when it's something beautiful, and when it's somebody that you adore and you love and you have to let go of, that's the agony. That's the Pisces level of agony, right? Because in the human form, we have attachments. We have attachments to people, to things, to places, etc. So this Pisces energy with Neptune, Venus, and Mercury is completing something in your life, depending on where those planets are transiting in your chart. And if it's not something that you can identify right now as completing, then just stay with it and let it unfold as it needs to, because Neptune is still going to continue in Pisces. It's just that Venus will move into Aries and Mercury will move into Aries, and then we'll have more of that Aries vibration later on in the month. But for the meantime, it's very much about surrendering, allowing things to close and complete in their very natural way that they need to. Okay, so on the 21st of April, Venus ingresses into Aries. So that's heading towards, the end of the month, but it's still in the month of April. And that's, pretty much a day or so later, or that day, day before, the sun goes into Taurus. So we start to get the Taurus season coming through. And that's going to create a lot of interesting experiences, because the sun's going to conjunct Uranus in Taurus. Now, Uranus just entered Taurus recently, so this is a very new energy, okay? It's actually on the 2nd and 3rd of April where we have a Moon, Venus, Mercury, Neptune conjunction in Pisces, that energy that I was just talking about. This is the shorter sort of period because we're talking about the moon here. So the moon will only be in Pisces for a couple of days. So 2nd and 3rd of April, Moon, Venus, Mercury, Neptune, all in Pisces. 2nd and 3rd of April, I expect to be the vibration on the earth plane, in the collective and within our own self, to be extremely, extremely sensitive, just to use a simple word. It can bring up a lot of sad sort of feelings as well, I think, it depends on what's going on in your life. It's a very, very, very soft, sensitive energy though. And I recommend that the 2nd and 3rd of April to just be very aware that the energies are so, so sensitive. So whatever you're kind of feeling during that time, try not to make a judgment on it, just try and let it rise and set as it naturally will, and let it bring up what it needs to bring up for you, perhaps to your consciousness. But don't make any really serious, hardcore decisions on those days, because the Pisces energy has that ability to create a bit of a, what's the word, fog, mist, in terms of our perception, right? Our left brain sort of perception on things. On a higher spiritual level, it's fantastic for opening those spiritual dimensions, working with your chakras, clearing all that stuff. But when it comes to your perception of reality, right? Because there are many different realities, but the consensus mainstream reality out there, with all that Pisces energy, those couple of days, it's very typical and very common to feel sad or feel lost or feel confused or feel disappointed or feel hurt. On the other hand, it's also possible to feel blissed out, because you could be on a meditation retreat. You could be, doing some spiritual rituals and work during that time where things can that the subtle inner sort of dimensions and levels are very, very receptive during that time. So it depends what's going on in your life, depends what you're doing. Okay, so Mercury ingresses into Aries on the 17th of April, so finally gets out of Pisces. And I think what's going to happen then is that we're going to experience any sort of confusion or uncertainty or inability to have certain thoughts rather, crystallized because of the Mercury retrograde period we went through. I think when Mercury moves into Aries, that's when we're probably going to get a greater sense of direction, right, and clarity with our thinking and what's been processing, right, and what was assimilating, over the last few weeks. It will become a lot more clear then, and you will literally be able to move forward, and be very direct and clear about your direction on that level. On the 22nd, 23rd, around there, those 2 days, Venus will be conjunct Chiron, because Venus will be in Aries and she'll catch up to Chiron. So, hey, it's not an easy energy, I'm not going to lie, but, very simply put, it can be a very raw sort of couple of days there when it comes to relationship stuff. It might trigger some kind of wound or some kind of issue that's been lying dormant in your relationship or in a particular relationship. That Venus conjunct Aries, conjunct Chiron in Aries might just trigger that. It might just trigger, your own sense of what it is you actually want in the partnership, in the relationship, a realization of where you feel you're not able to be yourself, right? Because Aries is all about being yourself. So something could resonate with you those couple of days, and it can be a very great opportunity to do some healing around that, you know, whether you're in a new relationship or an old relationship, or even if you're not in a relationship. I'm not, for instance, so I will use that energy to heal more aspects with the relationship I have with myself, for instance. Most important relationship is the one you have with yourself, because if you don't nurture that and you don't heal that, then you're just taking all your hurt and fractured, wounded elements into any relationship you step into. It's just the very natural thing to do. It all happens unconsciously, but it happens. So healing on the relationship that you have with yourself should always be primary anyway. Okay, so there's a lot of other bigger picture changes going on in the month of April, and I just want to quickly touch on those. Before I touch on those, just like to say that I've just got a couple of other dates here that I want to run through. Let me see. There's a lot of aspects, you know, for the month of April, but I don't want to overwhelm you all. So I'm just choosing the ones that I think, you know, would be important to really pay attention to. So one that I would definitely pay attention to is on the 27th of April, there's a Mars square Neptune aspect. So Mars will be in Gemini, and on the 27th of April, it squares Neptune. Now, Mars square Neptune is probably one of the most difficult aspects, really, for a number of different reasons. And, you know, whether that's natally or via transit, it's a very, very challenging aspect. We're talking about a planet of the ego, and then we're talking about a planet that dissolves the ego. So you can see there's an inherent fundamental difference. You know, one is over here and one is over there. So the Mars square Neptune can be very, very challenging when you're wanting to assert yourself, right? When you're wanting to direct yourself, when you're wanting to take charge in a situation. It can, with Mars square Neptune, it can feel like someone is being perhaps dishonest in some kind of way with you around that day. So just be very aware. That the thing to note, though, is that it's not necessarily, it can be, but it's usually not necessarily a malicious, conscious intention of wanting to be dishonest. But it seems that the archetype of Neptune and Mars in this 3D reality on a lower level manifestation, it seems to come up in a way where something dodgy kind of happens, something dishonest takes place. So from the point of view of spiritual energy, if you can use that day to use the Mars energy, and this is quite a paradox, really, because what I'm about to say is not Mars at all. You know, I'm about to say that if you can use this energy for a more self-less purpose, which is the Neptune, then you're likely to experience less of the harsher elements of this square aspect, right? But if you're wanting to just be selfish, which is Mars, and just get your own way and demand that you get what you want exactly how you want it on that day, then there's a high possibility of being quite disappointed, right? So I would be actually, the exact square is on the, where is it? On the 27th of April. But leading up to it, so the 25th and the 26th of April leading up, that the energy will be present. So for those 3 days, 25th, 26th, 27th of April, that can be another way of putting it, that can be a real, not such a fortunate time to be making business deals. That's another way of understanding it. If you're a woman and you're dealing with a man during that time, it can bring up the worst out of the connection in that way, in terms of you might be lied to, you might be deceived, you might be told a story that's not true, stuff like that. It can bring up stuff like that. So just a very, very tricky energy to be very mindful of during that time. And if you're doing any, business deals, I would highly recommend you don't during that time. Okay, so and just a very important point, and you can note this point in your mind about any transit you look at, right, when it comes to the inner planets and the outer planets. What's important to understand is that when you have a slower moving planet and a faster moving planet, to use the example that I just used, Mars and Neptune, Mars is not going to dictate to Neptune what it wants. It's never going to be able to do that, because Mars is the slower moving planet. The outer planet, Mars is the faster moving planet. The outer planet, which is Neptune, which is a slower moving planet, is going to dictate what happens to that Mars energy. So that principle you can apply to any transit you're looking at when you're looking at a faster moving planet versus, or in connection to, a slower moving planet. The slower moving planet is always going to dictate its terms to that faster moving body. It's always going to have the bigger influence, right? So it's very important to understand that, because that can help you understand how these faster moving transits are operating when they're actually forming aspects to the outer planets. In addition to that, you can also look at transiting Mars when it goes into Gemini, which is on the 31st of March. Let me just see that, just double check that. Yeah, I think that's right. So Mars is a very interesting one to observe via transits. Mars return charts are very, very powerful, can be very, very telling. So you may be having a Mars return. You may have Mars in Gemini, therefore you're having a Mars return. Mars returns happen every couple of years. And the Mars return chart would be a standalone chart that you would interpret from the point of view of what the themes that Mars holds for you over the next 12 months, for instance. But getting back to Mars in Gemini, when Mars is transiting that part in your chart over the next few weeks, where you have Gemini, for instance, well, that area of life is going to be Marsed up, so to speak, energized, right? There's going to be quite a bit of focus there. There might be more action in that area of your life during that time. But it is in the sign of Gemini, so it brings in a lot of things connecting to your ideas as well. So you might have just a lot more energy towards mental activity, which can be study, it can be researching, learning, a lot of reading, things like that. The important thing to note is, while Mars is transiting in your chart, if it's forming squares, conjunctions, or oppositions to any of the outer planets, which it will, pay attention to those days, because those days are going to be very, very sensitive and very critical for how Mars is going to either be conflicting and difficult on a particular day, or be very supportive towards the action you want to take towards things. The aspect that I just spoke about, Mars square Neptune, which you can have Mars squaring Neptune in your chart as it transits, and you will. It's important to pay attention to those dates. But in terms of the transit that I'm talking about, it's the transit currently at the moment, the collective transit, which is Mars square Neptune, right? 25th, 26th, 27th of April. Okay, moving on to the outer planets, there's a lot of very significant shift going on in the month of April. And we're going to go back a little bit now, but we are focused on the outer planets. So I'll start with Jupiter. Now, Jupiter has been direct since the 11th of July of 2018, right? So from July last year, we've had Jupiter moving in its direct motion, which is fantastic. And it's currently in Sagittarius, which is in his rulership. He's in his kingdom. Jupiter in Sag is freaking phenomenal, especially if you've got it natally. It's one of the most powerful Jupiters. It truly, truly is. Now, 10th of April of this year, 2019, Jupiter is stationary retrograde. Okay, so Jupiter decides to go retrograde and will stay retrograde until the 11th of August of this year. So something very important, a cycle with Jupiter, is taking us back, right? So there's going to be a lot of revisitation on all Jupiter things and wherever Jupiter is transiting in your chart. What is Jupiter things? Basically, it's your sense of meaning in life, you know, your overall meaning, your connection to faith, your connection to truth, your connection to your right brain, higher levels and higher ways of understanding things. There's an important process of revisiting those elements of your belief systems of your life that need to undergo a process of revision, right? On the 24th of April, Pluto is stationary retrograde. So the last time, what I meant to say is that Pluto has been direct since October last year, 1st of October, it went direct. So that's been a very, very powerful experience with Pluto moving direct for us from October last year until now, the 24th of April. And it's going to be retrograde until the 2nd of October, right? So for a few months there. So again, we're going through a very interesting process of revision, internalization, reflection. But this time with Pluto, we're talking about the soul components of your life, right? And your evolution, your path of evolution. So wherever you are in your evolutionary path at the moment, when Pluto turns retrograde, you are actually going to go back and really become, at the end of the retrograde period, you'll become clearer of what it was you needed to go back and revisit, reevaluate, revise, reflect deeper into, and possibly transform or purge further, right? Then on the 29th of April, Saturn, which is in Capricorn, is stationary retrograde. So, and Saturn has been direct since September last year of 2018. And it will turn retrograde on the 29th of April until the 17th of September 2019. So April is a huge, huge, huge month because we have recently just gone into Uranus in Taurus, Chiron in Aries. We had the equinox, 0 degrees Aries, the part of the year that represents births and new beginnings. We've got, I completely forgot. Let me just go back. On the 5th of April, so you can see Mercury still in Pisces. On the 5th of April, there's a new moon in Aries. I forgot to mention that, which is, pretty important. this new moon in Aries is very powerful because, okay, so it's at 15 degrees of Aries. So wherever 15 degrees of Aries is in your chart, then there's something very new beginning with the new moon, and it has a double sort of new moon vibration because it's in Aries. Aries is new beginnings, right? The new moon is new beginnings. So you can see there's a double vibration of that energy there. So it's a very powerful new moon from that perspective. It has a wide trine to Jupiter, which is lovely. It's going to need it because there's some difficult aspects to it. It's a normal new moon. It's not a solar eclipse or anything like that. The trine to Jupiter is fantastic because I think that really speaks to, see, Jupiter, quite apart from Jupiter representing philosophy, religion, truth, higher learning, right brain, intuition, faith, that's probably one of the biggest things. So the faith you have in yourself, faith you have in life, faith you have in people, all that sort of stuff. Jupiter transits can be very interesting because quite apart from that dimension, the other thing they speak to is people that you draw and attract in your life that are represented by Jupiter. So they are usually people who are older, who have a lot of wisdom, who have the attributes of a mentor, a teacher, guru type energy, someone who's inspirational and supportive and encouraging. So this new moon being trined by Jupiter says to me that that energy is, that Jupiter support is being given to that new moon, right? So whatever's starting for you with that new moon in Aries, there's a lot of comfort there with that trine by Jupiter, right? And it could just be that someone enters your life during that time that happens to be very Jupiterian. And that can be a person who's very generous as well, because Jupiter has a real vibration of generosity and blessings and gifts, right? So it can be somebody that really comes into your life during that time that can be very, very supportive, right, in what you're trying to begin. So be receptive to that because there will be someone there for you. On the other hand, the challenging aspects to this new moon is that the new moon forms a square to Saturn, Pluto, and the South Node. Now, it's interesting because the closest aspect out of Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto happens to be Saturn at this time. So Saturn is really trying to speak quite strongly to this new moon, right? So is Pluto, but Saturn is the closest, so he's trying to get he's trying to be the greater influencer, if you like. But remember what I said, slower moving planets do dictate to the faster moving planets. So Saturn will dictate to Jupiter, for instance, because Saturn moves slower than Jupiter. But Pluto is the slowest moving planet out of these three, out of Jupiter and Saturn. So Pluto square this new moon is really an opportunity to purge. It's an interesting experience, I think, because it's a new moon in Aries, so it has that real new beginning feel and experience to it. But on the other hand, you will be also coming up against maybe some resistances, which is the Saturn energy, because Saturn always brings up resistance. And the Pluto energy, Pluto squaring that new moon, which means it's going to be squaring the sun and the moon. It has such an intense vibration to it. So on a very intense, difficult level, it can be experiencing a lot of internal conflict emotionally because the Aries energy really just wants to initiate, right, and start its business, start its projects, do its thing. But the Pluto is conflicting with that because it's a square aspect. So the Pluto is intensifying the energy of the moon, of the new moon, and it's intensifying it in a way where it speaks to some component within where we may experience some kind of inner emotional conflict, and that may just be that we need to purge something out, right? So just keep that in mind, that this new moon it's a beautiful new moon. It's fantastic because it's in Aries and it's a new moon, but it does have that square to Saturn and Pluto. So that's going to add some kind of resistance and or purging, right? Now, the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in itself is that would actually be one of the most difficult conjunctions. I said that Neptune square Mars is one of the most difficult, but out of the two, I don't know which one to pick. They're both very difficult aspects. The Pluto and Saturn squaring this moon is likely to present really old, long-standing inner emotional stuff that needs to be purged. So, you know, the new moon in Aries I think can really help with that, because there's this vibration and sense of wanting to start new things, which is great, right? It's the birth of new things, but we can't do it if we don't address the inner sort of conflict that might be present as well. And to resist it and to try and stop it from emerging or coming forth is only going to make the experience more difficult. So it's probably better to purge and allow what needs to rise so that you can clear it, so that you can work much better and more effectively with this new moon in Aries, and then, you know, tune more into the trine from Jupiter, right, which is a lot of blessing and support around that time. So it's a mixture of energies, but overall it's incredibly intense and incredibly powerful, because we're talking about Aries, which is a very, very strong energy. It's a masculine energy, and Pluto is the ultimate source and force to all things, right? So Pluto's interaction with this new moon is speaking very strongly, so we need to pay attention to that. I think that's really all I had to say for the month of Aries. So, you know, just to recap, in summary, there's, you know, 3 outer planets turning retrograde. So this month is huge for energy shifts. We're going to feel them on a number of different levels. And at the same time, there's another stream, another dimension that's asking us to initiate, right, and to step into new journeys as well, right? So it's about balancing all that out and understanding where it's reflected in your life according to your birth chart. Okay, I will leave it there. And the reason it took me so long to come back, because the last video I did was 2 weeks ago, which was Uranus in Taurus. I was actually sick for a week after that, and there was a lot of emotional purging going on with that too, which really does relate to the month of March and April are really difficult months for me personally, because of a personal matter in my life, and this will be the case really for the rest of my life now, and it's just something that I have to deal with. But anyway, I was sick for a week, and I was wanting to come and do some more work on Chiron in Aries, and I just couldn't. I was sick for a week, and then I needed to catch up with my readings and clients, and I'm still trying to do that at the moment. But I do want to come back with some more on Chiron in Aries. I've just got some really important points to add to the video that I previously did, and I said that I would come back with a part 2. It won't be as long, but there will be some good solid points there for you guys. All right, guys. Happy equinox, happy full moon, which has passed. And even more importantly, because we're looking forward, happy new moon in Aries, which is coming up in a few days' time. Looking forward to that energy. Very happy that Mercury is moving direct, thank God. And let's just embrace this energy and use it in the way that it is calling you. Because the vibrations, the energies may be the same collectively. So the moon in Aries is the moon in Aries collectively. But what each planet in each sign, and whether it's direct or retrograde or stationary or whatever, all these components need to be applied to your own self in how they speak to you through what is going on in you and in your life at the moment, right? So this is another reason it's useful to have a birth chart done or have a forecast done, because that's my job to to describe all that to you and go through it with you. But if you're practicing astrology and learning on your own, then hopefully some of the tips that I gave you today will be useful. And hopefully this update just gives you guys a little bit more insight into the month of April. Okay, much love and blessings, and look forward to seeing you guys very, very soon. Much love. Thanks. Bye.